I'm Arnita Gadsden, and I'm the Executive Director of the Environmental Quality Commission. First of all, we'd like to say thank you to the Williams Company and all of your representatives for coming. I was afraid that the weather would stop this. In fact, it was Mr. Gordon that convinced me if they could come, we could come, because we had decided we weren't going to come. But then when he said, I've got these people coming from, he named everything, I called the chairman, I said, oh no, we've got to be there. Can't hear me?
No. Is your mic on?
Is this?
I don't know. Can you hear me now?
Yeah. That makes a difference. That's good.
Okay. Everybody knows who I am, so I don't have to go over that. And I'm thanking everybody again for coming. The first thing, we always kind of have some ground rules, and that is that we ask that you be respectful of all those who are speaking at all times. I always have this little philosophical thing that's personal to me. If you have an issue with the issue, let's disagree with the issue and not necessarily attack the person that's talking. In other words, don't attack the messenger. Just deal with the message. Also, that Mark will be, this is our chairperson, and then once I finish, then he will take over and it will go hopefully very smoothly then. There will be no questions entertained from the audience. This meeting is specifically for Williams to address the commission and for the commission to address the audience. The audience, yes, but answering the questions. All of you who were at our last meeting, thank you so very much, because the questions that the commission sent to the Williams Company came from your remarks, all of them. So thank you for coming, and I'm sure the Williams will address all of those as they get to them. You have 5x7 cards that are on the back table. If in the event that you have a question or a comment, please write it on that card, and those cards will be given to the commissioners. Also, recommendations. This is not necessarily, we may not have any recommendations that come out of the meeting tonight, but if it is decided, the commissioners will decide that. Arnita won't decide that. The commissioners will decide that tonight. And as you know, our recommendations go to the governor and to the secretary. Those are the only people that get the recommendation. I think that is all. Is there something I missed?
No, I think that's excellent.
Well, then I'm going to turn it over to the chairperson. This is Mark Grisham from Paducah, and he will introduce all the rest of the commissioners.
Thank you, Arnita. Again, I'd like to reinforce my appreciation for everyone attending tonight. The weather is very cold tonight, so I appreciate everyone making the effort. I know it takes a lot for people to get to these meetings. As Arnita said, my name is Mark Grisham. I'm the chair for the EQC. At this moment in time, what I'd like to do is ask for the rest of the personnel on the commission to introduce themselves. And so those of you, you guys that are out there, you may just have to stand up and speak loud if you don't mind so everybody can hear you. But I'd like to at least do that to get started.
Hello, I'm Jason DeLama, Commissioner, Energy Consultant.
I'm Martha Torrent, and I'm an architect in Lexington.
I'm Tom Herman. I'm a professional engineer. I work for Xenon Chemicals as the environmental manager in Louisville.
My name is Scott Smith. I'm an environmental engineering and consultant for environmental and energy issues.
Steve Coleman, retired from the Energy and Natural Resources Cabinet, and here from Franklin.
And at the table here, this is Janet Pinkston. She's with us tonight also. She always is to help us. Of course, everyone's met Arnita. With that, what I'd like to do is start the meeting off with, can I get a motion to approve the minutes from our last meeting?
So moved.
I have a proposal to approve the minutes as written from the last meeting. Do I have a second?
Second.
Those in favor?
Aye.
So moved. Thank you. As Arnita mentioned tonight, we're kind of deviating a little bit from our normal core business is how we conduct our meetings as far as multiple issues. Tonight, what we're going to do is allow the time in total to be to our guests here this evening. So with that, if there's any additional information that we'd like to bring up or new business before we get started, the chair recognizes Anita.
I forgot to say, anyone in here, my email, let me give you my email. You can email your questions to me. That email is Arnita, ARNITA, Gadson, GADSON, @ky.gov. And for those who are on the call-in, you can also email your questions in. Thank you.
Thank you. Chair recognizes Mr. Coleman.
Thanks, Mr. Chairman. I just wanted to make the commission members aware that on your behalf, I attended a meeting hosted by the Department for Environmental Protection and Division of Water on the Kentucky Nutrient Management Strategy. And just proposed, Mr. Chairman, at maybe one of our future meetings, we have them make a formal presentation to the full commission members about that new strategy under development.
Thank you very much. Any other new business? Okay. With that, I'd like to turn the meeting over to our guest this evening. So if whoever would like to start.
All right. Very good, Mr. Chairman. Good evening, Ms. Gadsden and commissioners, members of the public. My name is Bill Gorton. I'm a member of Stites and Harbison Law Firm in the Lexington office. I'm the chairman of the Environmental Energy and Natural Services Group at Stites and Harbison. We represent and advise the Bluegrass Pipeline companies in developing this interstate pipeline through this region. As I've discussed with your executive director, Arnita, the companies are well aware of the public dialogue associated with the project, including questions involving environmental protection, routing, geology, safety, right-of-way acquisition, etc. And even though the company has held many public meetings in the counties where the pipeline is going to be routed, we feel that coming here and getting the story and sharing with you very technical engineering and environmental details would be very helpful, and this is a good forum for that. To address these issues directly, the company's promised back in November to bring its project senior managers, senior engineers in the field of pipeline design, environmental protection, project development, operations, safety, and scientists and environmental professionals to meet with you and describe the project in significant detail. Much of the detail you'll hear about tonight has not been really reported. We read the newspapers too, and we feel that this is the place to really address a lot of the technical background issues and give you a status report on what's really going on. You're going to see and hear about the enormous amount of scientific and engineering analysis conducted today and that's continuing to assure that this important piece of American energy infrastructure is in fact the state of the art, and Kentuckians can feel comfortable that they are in a very good place related to the pipeline. The EQC is perhaps the appropriate forum for providing the technical project details. We reviewed the questions that were sent by Ms. Gadsden. Within the purview of the EQC, we have organized a presentation that addresses them and gives details that address other questions of interest that weren't even on your list, things we feel that would be very helpful to you in the community. There is significant detail coming this evening. We are going to give you the who, what, where, why, and how related to this project. We're going to present it in a logical sequence of pipeline project development and tell you what's driving the project, how it's being developed, and what to expect going forward. And the outline we'll follow this template because it seems to work in a logical sequence. The U.S. energy framework regarding natural gas, what's really driving this project. The regulatory framework and the extensive environmental review and analysis that is being undertaken. Very interesting to the people in this room is the geophysical and geotechnical reviews that are underway. In other words, we're going to address and provide detail as how we're analyzing the karst geology here in Kentucky along the pipeline. We're going to talk about the route planning and right-of-way acquisition, the negotiations with landowners. Then we're going to get into significant detail on the design, engineering, and construction related to the pipeline project, the steel, the construction techniques, the environmental protection aspects that are going on for the project, the pipeline itself. Then we'll get into operations and safety factors. The companies, both Boardwalk and Williams, have assembled a very qualified team, as I said earlier. Senior management and some of the most qualified and experienced professionals in pipeline development that you'll find in the United States are in this room. They've come from all over the place as part of that are involved in the project team from the companies in pipeline development, engineering, construction, and operation. We've invited them to be here. They prepared to address this commission. I want to make some introductions. Generally, they can raise their hands so that everybody knows who they are in the room. Bill Lawson here to my left is Vice President of Corporate Development from the Williams Companies. Mike McMahon here on my right is the Senior Vice President and General Counsel for Boardwalk Pipeline Partners. Rob Hawksworth back here is responsible for right-of-way acquisitions in this project. Ron Whitaker is responsible for safety and emergency responses. Mark Gebbia is the Manager of Environmental Services from the Williams Companies. Joe Cheek is the Manager of Asset Integrity. That is, when the pipeline's up and running, he's responsible for making the whole thing work and work well. Blaine Pritchett is the Manager of Engineering and Construction. You can hear some really extensive details from him on the pipeline materials themselves. Lee Andrews is responsible for engineering and construction. He is the project manager. Brent Waters is a geologist from Golder Associates. His team has been working very diligently studying the karst geology of the region, meeting with the Kentucky Geologic Survey and others, and he's going to, I'm sure, will impress you with the level of detail that's going on. Ross Hargrove from the Natural Resources Group, a nationally respected environmental analysis and permitting group, otherwise known as NRG. They work on pipeline projects throughout the United States, including some of the largest projects that you've heard of. NRG has been involved in. So, to kick it off, we're going to, Bill Lawson is going to describe the nature, and I think it's very important to understand the nature of what is driving this project. It's not merely this pipeline coming through Kentucky. It's part of an interstate pipeline that is part of the American United States energy security profile that is changing, and Bill Lawson's going to kick it off with those discussions, and then we'll take it from there.
Thank you for that introduction, and I'd like to say on behalf of the Williams Companies and our partners Boardwalk, we want to thank the Executive Director and the Commissioners for their time tonight. We truly appreciate it, and we appreciate having the opportunity to answer your questions and to offer our perspective on the project.
Mr. Lawson, if I can, right before you get started, I do apologize for the interruption. We did receive, and I should have mentioned this in the very beginning, some questions we received today from the Kentuckies for the Commonwealth, and I just want to make sure that everyone understands we will not be addressing those this evening as we just received those today, but I wanted to ensure everyone that we did receive those so that if you don't hear anything on your specific question, I don't want anyone to think it was omitted or left out, okay? I just want to keep that above table so everyone knows that, okay? Again, my apologies, sir.
Thank you, and appreciate that. And we hope to have a dialogue tonight. You know, if you have questions or comments or would like to, ask follow-up questions, please stop the presentation because it's meant to be a conversation. But anyway, with that as a backdrop, I thought I might offer a little bit more on the narrative that's occurred in this country. And as you know, it's been a classic story of American entrepreneurs using technology, new applications of technology, and an ingenuity to create solutions to problems that have been vexing this country for a long time. This time, the recipient's been the American energy industry. And what we see today is that this revolution that's occurred in our ability to extract natural gas, natural gas liquids, and oil from previously difficult formations is now transforming the narrative for this country. After all, today, looking down the road, it's possible that North America will be completely energy independent by the end of this decade, which is a stunning reversal of fortunes. Today, the United States is an exporter of natural gas. Our oil production is growing the fastest in the world right now. We have the fastest incremental growth in oil production. And the American consumers have been receiving tremendous benefits. If you look at, just last year, IHS, an econometrics firm, produced a report that said the average American average American household has received a benefit of $1,200 per year in lower energy costs. That's because we found more sources of it, and it's lowering the costs. And in turn, that's also making American industry even more competitive on a global basis. After all, we have access to some of the lowest cost energy, which allows for energy intensive industries to do well. But we also now have access to some of the lowest cost feedstocks in the world, which helps American manufacturers up and down the value chain. And tonight I want to just hit on a couple of those themes as I set the backdrop. But as I pointed out earlier, this revolution, one of the epicenters in the American energy revolution has been the Marcellus and Utica shale formations. And they're up in Pennsylvania, Utica, and West Virginia. And these formations have tremendous reserves. And this is an area that once was importing the majority of its natural gas, the majority of its fuels, and now is in the process of completely reversing that and exporting natural gas into Canada, into the mid-continent of the United States, and even pushing down south into the lower mid-continent states. And this is a tremendous change. As a companion to that development of those natural gas resources, oftentimes you find natural gas liquids. And natural gas liquids are ethane, propane, butane, and natural gasoline. And so producers have been increasing the production of natural gas liquids. And they're coming on in such large volumes that they're overwhelming local demand and local marketplaces, and they're looking for other homes where they can be used. Propane is often used by households for heating or for cooking and other things. Butanes go into typically gasolines, also make plastics. Natural gasolines also go towards the motor fuel marketplace. And ethane is either only used as for natural gas, to be burned as natural gas, or it's used also to make plastics. And I'll touch upon this a little bit later. But the concept and the idea behind what we're trying to achieve here is to establish and to connect growing supply regions in the Utica and the Marcellus to growing demand centers on the U.S. Gulf Coast, where the bulk of the petrochemical industry is housed. And there's growing demand and investment in that corridor. And so our idea is to connect supply and demand as safely and as reliably as absolutely possible. And just to kind of quote, the Department of Transportation has done studies on the safety of moving products by different modes of transportation. And pipelines are by far the safest mode. In fact, of the incidents that they keep track of at the DOT, only 1/100% are from pipelines. They're 37 times safer than rail transportation. So, taking a look at the next picture, this is just, and it's probably hard to see from the back of the room, but this is, our idea coming to life here with the pipeline coming out of western Pennsylvania, going through Ohio and a little bit into West Virginia, coming down into Kentucky. We're planning on building about 580 miles of new pipeline. It would be a 24-inch pipeline, of which 182 miles about are in Kentucky. And at Hardinsburg, Kentucky, we would connect with Texas Gas or Boardwalk's pipeline. They have 3 natural gas transmission lines there, one of which we would take out of natural gas service and repurpose it for natural gas liquid service to take those NGLs all the way down to Louisiana. A small little piece of pipe will be built, and then we will fractionate it or separate those natural gas liquids into their component parts and deliver them to marketplaces where they can be consumed and utilized. Now, if you look at the next slide, This is just a little synopsis on our companies. Both Williams and Boardwalk have been venerable energy infrastructure providers. In fact, Williams is over 105 years old, and we've been in the energy infrastructure business for the balance of that time. We own and operate over 15,000 miles of natural gas interstate pipelines supplying New York City, the East Coast, the West Coast, as well, and there's some maps a little bit later. We have 1,400 miles of NGL pipelines, tens of thousands of miles of natural gas gathering systems, processing plants, and other energy infrastructure assets. Boardwalk is of similar ilk. They operate about 14,000 miles of natural gas pipelines. One of their most important divisions is headquartered right here in Kentucky, Texas Gas, in Owensboro. They have about 315 employees at that facility and in this state. And if you look at the two companies combined, Boardwalk with over 60 years of history, Williams with over 105 years of history, collectively, both of our companies move about 25% of the natural gas consumed in this country. So we have a great deal of experience, and we've been doing it a long time, and we like to think we've done some of it quite well to have such a long and rich history. Now, if you move to the next slide, major pipelines in the United States, whether they're moving liquids, oil products, natural gas liquids, oil, or natural gas, are no stranger to this country. There's hundreds of thousands of miles of pipelines in this country. And they are, this is the distribution system that supplies the energy we need in order to fuel our economy and grow it. Now, when you look at Kentucky, Kentucky's no stranger to pipelines either. You've got almost 12,600 miles of pipe. We're looking to perhaps add 182 to that inventory with our new Bluegrass concept. And they've been successfully operating in this state for quite some time, helping producers in the eastern part of the state move their products to the marketplace, helping refiners move products, as well as petrochemical companies as well. Now, the next slide takes you to the ethylene value chain, and I think this is kind of an important piece of context here. Ethylene is the building block of plastics and all these materials that we use every single day in our lives. Whether it's, in our house for carpets, or different products we use, or it's in our cars. The average car uses about 600 pounds of plastics per car. It seems like it grows each and every year. Kentucky being the third largest manufacturer of automobiles in the United States, having access to lower cost feedstocks is a great advantage. But if you look at it, plastics touch every element of our lives. And in the United States and in North America, we use ethane as the principal feedstock to make ethylene, which is the base product for all these different plastic materials. And we have a tremendous competitive advantage over the rest of the world, because the rest of the world uses naphtha. And naphtha is a part of the barrel of oil. So if you think about it from a broad perspective, oil costs about $100 a barrel. Naphtha is priced on a similar basis. Ethane, since its alternative use is natural gas, to be burned as natural gas, tends to be much lower priced. So it tends to be priced around, right now, at about $15 per barrel. And if you adjust for the different types of products you get when you use these materials as feedstocks, there's still a tremendous advantage that ethylene producers in the United States and in North America have over the rest of the world. And what's interesting is both Mike and I have the privilege of working for large corporations, and so we meet with firms from all over the world. And I've met with companies from Asia, Latin America, Europe, and even the Middle East, who are looking to put investment dollars in the United States to build new facilities, build new manufacturing plants, to take advantage of these new resources and the capabilities that we have in this country. It really has been a game changer. And I saw something, just on my way up to Kentucky that just floored me, but I think it summed it up quite well. At Davos, the president of a Saudi Arabian company named Sabek announced that they plan to find ways to invest in the United States shale industry and petrochemical industry. Why? Because we have very, very competitive feedstocks. And so this is a stunning reversal that will have implications for Americans, jobs, and new opportunities. And those implications translate from a Kentucky perspective, and for just the pipeline, we're looking at new ad valorem taxes that we would pay because we're installing a new system. And over a 10-year period, we estimate that those new ad valorem taxes might generate about $136 million. There's also construction jobs that would occur during the construction phase of this project, which would last about a year, about 1,500 jobs, of which we're going to seek local labor to try and help us build these facilities. And then there are the right-of-way payments that we're making to the individual landowners who grant us the privilege of crossing their property with this pipeline. And we'll talk more about it. But there's other benefits that accrue to this type of infrastructure. There's another shale play that's in the early stages of development. It's in the Illinois Basin. It's called the New Albany Shale, and it touches the western portion of Kentucky. And so there's the prospects that new, energy E&P type jobs would be developed in this region as well. If you think about Pennsylvania, since 2005 to 2012, 90% of the job growth in that state, and that's with two really major cities, Pittsburgh and Philadelphia, have been created by one industry, and that's been energy. So it's been a profound change in Pennsylvania, and those opportunities will appear in other parts of the country. Now, one key gating item is infrastructure. If producers can produce more oil or more natural gas liquids or natural gas, that's great. But if they can't take it to market, it's not worth very much. And by having this type of investment, if there are NGLs found in the New Albany Shale and there are commercial quantities of them, having a major piece of infrastructure, because after all, we'll invest billions of dollars building this infrastructure, will be a great asset to them because they can connect to us because we're an intrastate common carrier pipeline to take those NGLs to the marketplace where they can get the best value. Now, if you turn to the next slide, the secondary benefits to Kentucky are a little harder to kind of see from an obvious perspective because there isn't direct ad valorem taxes. But this translates into new opportunities. After all, in Kentucky, you have a petrochemical plant down in Calvert City, Westlake's facility. And just a few short years ago, they were having very difficult times because their products and their feedstocks were just not priced competitively. But today, going forward, they're expanding. Why? Because they have access to low-cost NGLs. In particular, they're going to take ethane off another pipeline called ATEX to supply that facility. But there's also the opportunity for further growth. And having infrastructure in place helps create new opportunities. There could be opportunities for other petrochemical companies to be here. But the secondary impact is also just as profound. And the secondary impact is actually what industry can do with it. You've probably already seen where energy-intensive businesses like steel companies, pulp and paper manufacturers, and others are seeing a renaissance in this country and in this state in particular. But it's the other ones that garner benefits too. Those that use plastic materials as their feedstocks to make their products. This is where there's a tremendous opportunity because if we have low-cost plastic materials being produced, whether it's at Calvert City or in the Gulf Coast, but then transported up here to be put in cars, and manufacturers of automobiles have access to low-cost energy and low-cost materials, that translates into world-class competitive advantages. And you have industries here that are prospering. And when you look at Kentucky, you're right at the nexus of this change. Lots of great resources being developed, the potential for other resources to be developed even in this state, but you're right in the hub of low-cost energy and access to lower-cost feedstocks. So we think that garners a tremendous advantage for this state. So with that as a backdrop, I'll turn it back over to Bill, who will walk us through the rest of the presentation.
Well, let me just ask this while these gentlemen are sitting up here. Do you have any questions related to the kind of what's driving this? We're going to get into a lot of technical details here now.
Any questions from the commission at this point?
Are there any planned off-ramps for this material in Kentucky, or can we get an off-ramp at some point in the future for the material from your plant?
The answer to that is yes. We have, Westlake has written a letter to Secretary Peters, and and they acknowledge that we have assured them that they would have the ability to interconnect with the pipeline should their future needs desire that. The other thing is as a common carrier pipeline, we have the obligation to allow, say, producers start to come bring on ethane out of the eastern part, or the Illinois Basin is developed, the new Albany Shell is developed in western Kentucky. It's a great piece of infrastructure that would be allow those producers to tie directly into the pipe, have their NGLs taken to market. So while today there is no interconnect that is being designed, the pipeline will allow future interconnects in Kentucky.
And just to perhaps augment Mike's comments, producers tend to, move to the most economic play. And right now, some of the most attractive plays are up in the Utica and the western Marcellus because they're very rich in natural gas liquids. The plays in eastern Kentucky tend to be, have less natural gas liquids in them. They're economic at a different price point. And so as prices move up and down, the economic attractiveness of those plays will move with that. And so when they are attractive, having this type of infrastructure in place only makes it better for those producers, because now it gives them an avenue to get to a marketplace, particularly with ethane, which they didn't have up until, until Bluegrass comes along.
I have a question. Since we're talking context, the recent Supreme Court ruling in Pennsylvania around the ability to fracking rights on private land, do you guys see that having an impact on your expected supply or any issues there? I'm just kind of, I know this is recent.
Well, I think that, how that decision really ripples through the production in the Marcellus is yet to be seen. But essentially what they did is that they gave more power to the local municipalities than what they had under what's called Act 13. So, right now, there's a lot of drilling going on. There's a lot of areas that are very open to the production of natural gas, and especially in western Pennsylvania. So it's really too early to tell whether that decision will have a real impact on a lot of drilling. It will have an impact on the margin. As production is located near municipalities, that production may be harder to produce than what it was before the decision.
Yeah, thank you.
You mentioned 1,500 jobs being created in Kentucky, but most of those appear to be hotel workers, restaurant workers, that sort of thing. How many direct people would be employed, Kentuckians working on the pipeline construction?
These would be construction jobs that are created as we're doing what they, and you'll hear more about this later, is the spreads, as we're installing the pipeline. So those would be, we're anticipating 1,500 construction jobs. And then the way it will work is right now there is a tremendous shortage of labor nationwide, with the skills to install all of these systems, because we're having a tremendous build out as systems are being rearranged to take supplies in different directions as new infrastructure is being put in place to accommodate this growth. And so lots of Kentucky pipeline welders and other things are on projects all over this country. But what we have said we would do is we would work with the construction firms we would hire, and we would ask that they, have a desire to hire local labor wherever possible. So will be something that we'll work into our contracts, and they'll go out and hire local labor. What we want to find are, individuals and teams that have a history of installing things safely, conducting the work safely, and have a high performance quality as well.
And to add on, Bill, one of the things that makes bringing the pipeline to this area attractive is the skilled labor that is in this part of Kentucky, and the training facilities that are actually almost along the route that the unions have put together to train welders and train some of these specialties. So, when we look at building projects, we look for a good local labor force for obvious reasons, but here in Kentucky, you have really some assets that some of your neighboring states do not have in terms of training and already skilled labor.
And then
But the number of direct employed in construction is 1,500, because your
1,500.
slide said restaurant workers, and
Oh, well, there are lots of secondary effects, but we're anticipating 1,500.
direct construction.
And, you know, if you think about it too, from a long-term perspective, if Kentucky is able to build on, you know, access to lower cost energy, lower cost feedstocks to grow their manufacturing base, there could be other build-up, you know, other add-on effects as well, new construction of new facilities and other things. We certainly hope that will be the case, and we hope Kentucky is a big winner here. We will certainly have a lot of assets that other states won't have.
Does anyone else on the commission have a question?
There'll be plenty of time.
Okay, all right, thank you, let's keep moving, thank you.
Okay, Bill, thank you very much. So, this is where we're gonna go, as far as, the rest of the evening. I mean, this is an enormous energy swing in America, and to develop the infrastructure like this pipeline, it requires very extensive planning and development, environmental studies, permitting, engineering, et cetera. So we're gonna start talking now about the regulatory framework and environmental review, which I know has got a lot of notoriety lately. We're gonna bring Lee Andrews up here. Lee, as I mentioned before, is an engineering construction project manager, and then, whoops, he's gotta do high hurdles first.
Let's do.
And then Ross Hargrove will come up in a moment. So, just tell us kind of how you frame this project up and get the environmental analysis underway.
Great, thanks, Bill. You know, when building a pipeline, and especially one of this scale, we have to consider a lot of issues that we need to examine and manage to prepare the project. And I want to kind of walk through, give you an overview of those factors that we begin to investigate, and then Ross Hargrove will go into detail about those. But one of the first things that I believe certainly pertinent to this audience is we begin a rigorous exercise of investigating and surveying and trying to characterize the natural environment that we're going to be building this pipeline through. And we're looking at all features of the right-of-way. That's the land use, and specifically we're looking at resources, wetlands, streams, rivers, reservoirs. We're looking at those. We also, in those reviews, examine and survey for threatened and endangered species. We do cultural surveys that look for historical and archaeological resources. We also take into account the land use, whether it's residential, commercial, or public lands. Also, we examine the soil types, and that helps us from a construction design and planning standpoint. We also determine, based on soil types, based on land use, and the resources that we'll be encountering and crossing, will determine the space that we need for construction. Will determine our workspace. And then one of the other things that we attempt to do is, where we can, we try to co-locate with existing rights of way, whether that's another pipeline or an electrical utility where we can. We try to do that to minimize our footprint and try to stay with a right of way where it's possible. And then you're going to hear quite a bit more about the shallow geology that we'll be building over, which is specifically here in Kentucky, mainly concerns karst formation. And Brent with Golder Associates will lay that out in quite a bit of detail for you. Ron, I'll let you kind of drill into the regulatory aspects of environmental.
Ross Hargrove is one of the project managers in the permitting aspects of it, dealing with the myriad state and federal and even local agencies that have jurisdiction over the activities. And he's going to kind of give a synopsis of what's going on, maybe some examples too. So, go ahead, Ross.
Thank you, details. The interstate natural gas pipeline construction process is both heavily regulated at the federal, state, and local level. The slide there shown on the projector identifies the agencies that we are currently working with and preparing applications for, which will ultimately review the project and issue permits necessary for construction. This includes the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers, which regulates installation of the pipeline underneath navigable rivers and construction impacts on wetlands and water bodies. It includes PHMSA, which regulates construction specifications related to the pipeline, as well as monitoring and inspection of the pipeline once it's operational. It includes the National Park Service, which, although no wild and scenic rivers are crossed in Kentucky, we are working with the National Park Service for impacts on two water bodies in their watersheds located in Ohio. The Federal Energy Regulatory Commission is responsible for review of that portion of the project associated with conversion of boardwalks pipeline assets for the project. The U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, they regulate potential impacts on threatened and endangered species, as well as potential impacts on migratory birds. Federal Aviation Administration regulates construction activities located within the vicinity of airports. And although that construction of the pipeline is not located within the vicinity of a major airport in Kentucky, we do have airports that we are constructing here in Ohio. And then the Federal Highway Administration is also required to approve our pipeline installation underneath federal highways. Outside of the federal authorizations, we require numerous authorizations from agencies within Kentucky as well. We are required to obtain numerous permits from the Kentucky Department of Environmental Protection. This includes the 401 Water Quality Certificate, as well as permit to construct across or within most of the streams and wetlands crossed by the pipeline routes, as well as permits for the discharge of construction stormwater and hydrostatic test water used to test the integrity of the pipeline prior to being placed into service. The Historical Heritage Commission is involved with the review of our cultural resource surveys to determine if any of the sites we have found are determined to be eligible for register on the national listing of historic places. The Kentucky Department of Fish and Wildlife Resources provides guidance regarding sensitive species located within the state and their habitats. The Kentucky Department of Parks, we require certain easements from them for crossing of state lands. The Kentucky Transportation Cabinet is required to review and approve our permits for road crossings. And then also a number of local authorizations are necessary for the construction of the pipeline as well, including erosion control permits, permits for construction underneath local roads, as well as local floodplain development permits. So all those permits, what results in is it's a very extensive effort to prepare applications for these agencies for review. Each of these agencies review the project for that portion within their jurisdiction. For a project of this scale, which is approximately 180 miles of new construction within Kentucky, the applications are very comprehensive. The photo there shown on the slide is an actual photo of the pre-construction notification we recently provided to the Corps of Engineers. The studies that we do to prepare these documents are quite extensive, and as you can see, they're thousands of pages in length. These documents contain all the commitments that Williams makes for construction of the pipeline, including the methods of crossing each and every wetland and water body located along the pipeline route. These commitments are then translated by the agencies into conditions of our subsequent approval processes, which are to be enforced under a permit. In addition, as the agencies review these applications, they will likely identify additional issues of concern or areas of interest which they may condition the project construction as well. And then also, as part of the environmental review process, the public will have several opportunities to review and comment on on permits issued for the project. So all the work that kind of goes into those first starts back in the office. We perform a lot of desktop review prior to establishing the pipeline route. This includes extensive analysis of GIS data resources, which includes available wetland and water body information. We also make visits to State Historical Preservation Office to identify records of past found archaeological sites. We use this data to develop the pipeline route in a manner that which avoids sensitive resources to the extent possible. At the same time as we're doing the early desktop work, we consult with several agencies regarding survey methodology and the appropriate surveys and locations to these in the areas of concern. This includes sensitive resources such as threatened and endangered species, sensitive water bodies. We use this information to go out in the field and begin survey of the pipeline route. We perform wetland and water body delineations on all of the parcels crossed by the project. We perform cultural resource surveys on most parcels crossed by the project in areas where wetlands and water bodies are crossed, and an area where there's a high potential for encountering cultural artifacts. We also perform threatened and endangered species surveys. The photo there shown there is one of the Indiana bat specimens that we captured during a survey this past summer. The Indiana bat's a threatened and endangered species that is federally listed. It's unique in that it uses caves during the winter and then uses trees to roost during the summer. And it's one of the most important species that can be encountered along our pipeline route. We conducted this past year one of the largest surveys for Indiana bats that has been known to occur within this country. Within Kentucky, we sampled 200 sites along the pipeline route where habitat is potential, and we did catch 8 bats, in which we attach a small transmitter you can kind of see in the thing, and we triangulate this bat and we track it back to the roostry that it's using in order to identify the specific habitats that are being used so we can develop avoidance and mitigation measures with the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service. We also conduct geophysical and geotechnical investigations along the route to help further avoid sensitive areas. One of the important resources that we've been characterizing along the pipeline route are wetlands. Our general concept for approaching wetland crossings is to avoid where possible, minimize where we can't avoid them, and to mitigate any resulting impacts associated with construction. To date, we've identified temporary impacts that would result from construction of less than 10 acres. Those temporary impacts are associated with short-term removal of vegetation during construction, the resulting soil disturbance. Permanent impacts that are associated with pipeline construction are associated with the conversion of certain types of wetland types, such as forest wetlands and shrub type wetlands, to more of an open type wetland after installation of the pipeline once it's operational. As the DOT does require that the right-of-way be cleared of vegetation to allow aerial inspection. So we've identified about 2 acres of permanent impacts that would result from construction as part of that conversion. At this time, there would not, as the project is currently designed, there would be no proposed permanent filling of wetlands located along the pipeline route. So then, as I said, we try to avoid first, minimize impacts second, and then as a last resort, we do, as required by the Corps of Engineers, provide compensatory mitigation for unavoidable impacts. And that would include providing or purchasing wetland mitigation banks from several banks located along the pipeline route. And where those credits are not available, we'll be contributing to a in lieu fee program here that the state of Kentucky manages. To go a little bit further in depth into the types of surveys that we perform, as I said, we complete wetland surveys on all the parcels crossed by the project. This is really to identify the extent of wetlands crossed by the pipeline route, and then to characterize the type of wetland. This is done by a combination of assessing the type of vegetation present, such as plants and shrubs, as well as characterizing the soils that are located within the wetlands and adjacent upland areas. As I mentioned, bat surveys for this project have been very extensive. It's been a very large effort. We're working very closely with the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service to identify mitigation measures that we can do to reduce impacts or potential impacts on these species. We conduct mussel surveys at many of the larger streams and water bodies crossed along the pipeline route with the intent of trying to identify sensitive mussel populations, as well as rivers that have high populations of mussels, which is an indicator of high water quality. In those situations where we identify large populations, we work to develop avoidance measures to mitigate potential impacts on those species, which would include use of the horizontal directional drill method to avoid direct impacts on the water body. Cultural surveys are completed along most of the pipeline route. These surveys entail visual walkover inspections where we have adequate visibility of the soil surface, such as in agricultural areas, where visibility is in poor, such as in treed areas or grassy areas. The cultural resource crews dig test pits by hand or by shovel at frequent intervals to characterize and collect soil from those sites. They sift that soil through a screen in order to identify any artifacts that might be present. Once a potential cultural site is identified, we often return to the landowner to seek additional survey permission in order to survey outside of our standard corridor so that we can fully delineate the entirety of the site. Once the site has been fully delineated, we've been able to identify reroutes around these locations, and to date, we have identified approximately 60 cultural resource sites located along the pipeline route, but we've successfully been able to avoid all of them to date through reroutes or by use of the horizontal directional drill method. And then once, as artifacts are studied, they're usually cleaned up and studied in the lab, and then they are the property of the owner, and we return them at a later date. As I had said, avoidance and minimization are key impacts, or key tools to minimize impacts on the environment. We are continually rerouting the pipeline and reconfiguring our workspace as sensitive areas are identified. Where sensitive areas cannot be identified, we explore methods such as the horizontal directional drill method to install the pipeline. This measure is commonly used on many of the larger water bodies, especially the more sensitive water bodies in areas where sensitive resources such as cultural resources or habitats for threatened endangered species have been identified. Where we cannot avoid these sensitive resources, we've been narrowing the construction right-of-way. In wetlands, where possible, we use a 75-foot construction right-of-way rather than a 100-foot construction right-of-way, which we use in adjacent upland areas. We also work to minimize our workspace in those areas as well. And as further as mitigation, we use a number of just construction methods to minimize direct impacts on wetlands and water bodies, such as installation of temporary bridges to facilitate movement of equipment across these features, installation of timber construction mats to minimize soil disturbance and rutting within wetlands and water bodies, as well as installation of erosion and control measures to prevent erosion into streams and wetlands. These plans that we have here we have a very comprehensive construction and mitigation and restoration plan, in addition to several other plans, such as our HG contingency plan, plan for oil and hazardous materials, an agriculture impact mitigation plan, and an unanticipated fines and discovery plans, which is intended for cultural resources found during construction. These plans are part of our application processes and are submitted to the agencies for review and ultimately become conditions of our permits. Once all the permits have been obtained and construction of the pipeline begins, the permits that we receive, as well as the applications and our approved environmental construction plans, become part of the contract agreement between Williams and the contractors choosing for construction. These are enforced under contract. As part of the training process for all construction personnel that come onto the project, they receive an environmental training program that is related to their role and position on the project. This training program goes through, identifies the environmental regulations and appropriate permit conditions that are specific to their role, so they have full knowledge of these as they conduct their work. Also, as part of the environmental compliance program, the Bluegrass Pipeline project will hire third-party environmental inspection personnel, and these personnel will have stop work authority, and will work with the contractor to identify areas of concern where additional erosion control measures may be required, and then also work with the contractors to achieve compliance on the project.
Thanks, Russ. There's obviously a lot we could talk about at any level of detail that would take all day long related to the various components, but clearly there's very extensive analysis going on related to permitting the project. And I know there's been a lot of dialogue, and we're willing to entertain some questions. If you have them, if we can address them, we will. We've got the scientists here.
The chair recognizes Mr. Coleman.
Just a question for you. You mentioned the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission. Does this project now have a tracking number through FERC at this point?
Well, there's two pieces of the project. The conversion of Texas Gas does. We filed an application for abandonment, which is the technical term we use, with FERC back at the end of May. The environmental assessment associated with that application is due to come out, be issued by FERC sometime in February. And then after that environmental assessment is issued, then there will be a comment period. But that environmental assessment will only focus on the Texas Gas conversion portion. Then the piece, the new build piece that starts in Hardensburg and goes north is not subject to FERC's jurisdiction from a construction and permitting perspective. It will be for rates and terms of service. But that goes back to what we said before. That will be governed primarily on the federal side by the Corps, which will be the lead